Welcome to the place where paths collide. Crossroad conversations, let's take the ride. From shadows deep to the light we see. Stories of strength, the voices speak.
What's up, Worcester? This is Jacqueline with Women's Strong Recovery and Wellness Coaching, and this is episode 2 or 3? 3? This is episode 3 of season 2 of Crossroad Conversations, and I'm just so excited. So what we're doing now, and you're gonna see in the next few episodes as they start to come out more, we are focusing on men's mental health and what that looks like, how we can bring more awareness, sitting with guys that have actually done some work, have created platform and different ways that we can approach men's mental health, we can approach recovery, substance use disorder in a way that you can feel connected and I think really understood. And only, a man that has been in that shoes that can really use his experience, personal and lived, can usher that in. So hopefully these conversations will reach many and reach the people that it matters to most. And we can start diving into these other questions. So I'm here. I'm going to introduce my guest, John. Hi, John.
Hi, everybody.
Please let us know your title, what you do now, and then we'll dive in some more.
So today, ultimately, I'm just John. Mm-hmm. I'm a grateful father in recovery. I'm a person that's been a father for a long time, been a husband for a long time, but ultimately been an advocate for the peer support world.
Peer support world. And so when you say you've been an advocate for peer support world, in what context do you mean for your peer supports?
A long time ago when I first came home and met my beautiful wife now, Kirsten, she asked me a question. I'll never forget it. It was right down the road. She said, I understand that you've got some clean time, right? But how much recovery time do you have? And I had no idea how to answer that question. No idea. And she introduced me to the world of peer support. And I realized then that that's what I was missing. I realized that all the step work, all the other pathways that were out there, that peer support made me feel accepted for who I am. I didn't have to fit in a box that somebody else designed for me. And I eventually grew that. I'm a former program director of a peer recovery support center. I'm an advocate for it. I've spoken at Harvard, at UMass, at all sorts of places. UMass is one of the ones that I think that is up there with Harvard because we got to speak with the primary care track residents at UMass about different pathways to recovery, but more specifically, medicated assisted treatment. Mm. And I got to share my lived experience with them about what it's like to be on these. I've been on Suboxone, I've been on methadone, I've been on all of the stuff, all the things, I've tried it out. So to be able to share my experience with somebody else and see that light come back on in their eyes, like I'm sure somebody saw happen to me so long ago. That's why I'm an advocate for this, is that sometimes you just got to sit with somebody. You don't necessarily have to ask them a million questions. Sometimes just being there with somebody is enough. Or sometimes just answering the phone for somebody is enough. I'm a certified recovery coach supervisor now. And that's what I love the most, is meeting people where they're at. But when somebody can call me and go on a rant for a minute, for whatever that they're going through, whether they're inpatient somewhere or they're well into their recovery, and they just need somebody to listen for a second. And then they're like, I feel so much better, thank you. And then that was it. It's so genuine. It doesn't take any skill other than to listen and to, identify with where somebody's been, what they're doing.
Yeah. So now you have this role, peer support, and that's what you're doing for others. But how did it look like for you, maybe going if we go back a little bit, right, into your journey of like, you mentioned incarceration and being a father and the supports or no supports, what did that journey look like? When did you start to, you know, experience the incarcerations? And then what did that look like as far as the support or no support in that?
Here's the thing is, I came from a household generation that you didn't talk about what happened in the house, all that stuff. And I didn't realize that ultimately it was not having support. I had a big house. I was the youngest of five. But because I was the youngest, I was like lost in the shuffle. You know what I mean? I grew up right up the road, right off Rodney Street. Saw a lot of stuff way too young, that I didn't understand the impact of, but it like shaped the person that I was. But it was perspective. You know what I mean? I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know that the things that I saw were wrong. But ultimately, that's the first real, I guess you could call it peer support or maybe peer pressure back then, you know. And it was because people were excited to see me. And, you know, it was because, now I see is because I could be manipulated. I could be used to go make sales before I knew what sales were. You know what I mean? I had no idea. But I fell in love with the concept of the flashy cars and the girls and the money. And I was always told, like, monkeys don't sell bananas. You don't touch it. You know what I mean? It was just, it was presented in this context that was like, this is what you want. You know what I mean? And even though, yeah, you know, and even though I was, had a great house, I got everything that I needed. I didn't want for anything, went to private schools, all that stuff, but I didn't really fit anywhere I went. Lived in the hood, went to private school. So I didn't fit in at school because they knew I was the city kid, but then I went home in my, you know, private school uniform and didn't fit in there. So like, no matter where I was, I had to learn at a very young age to pretend. I had to learn at a very young age how to adapt and survive. And ultimately, that's what happened is I realize now that like I was in survival mode. I experienced sexual abuse before I was like, tracked it down before I was 9. I don't exactly know the age of it. But it just kind of, and with that, I learned how to disassociate. I learned how to compartmentalize things and just not think about it. And then it wasn't until I got a little bit older that I started to experience, I had children young. I had kids just before I was 18. I remember we couldn't sign a lease because we weren't 18 yet. And that was a mess. And because I was so focused on being a father and providing and all the stuff that I thought, you know, that role meant, I went through this period of time that's all I was focused on. I didn't do any growing up. The perspective wasn't on me and how to have healthy boundaries and take care of myself. None of it. It was, I have a kid now. Like, enough is enough, you know? But I was like 22, 23 when I went to the bar for the first time with an old high school friend and wanted to do cocaine afterwards. And I did it. And I didn't realize what that drug actually does. And what it did was it basically opened up Pandora's box. It affects the part of your brain that tells you to say things or not to say things. So like, did it help me in a way to open up? Yes, but I didn't open up to a qualified professional. I didn't open up to somebody, you know, that I should have. And ultimately, I opened this Pandora's box and like all this stuff started flooding out. I started thinking about more things, drumming up old feelings, drumming up old traumatizing situations that happened to me when I was younger. And that's where my real substance use like took a hold of the person that I was. I very quickly switched from not wanting to be up all night to going the other way. I'm a product of the Oxycontin epidemic. You know, the first opiate I ever touched was an Oxycontin, which is one of the reasons why I have such a loud voice in the abatement funds and all that stuff, because ultimately it destroyed a good part of my life and my older children's lives. But I didn't realize that I didn't develop good coping mechanisms or any of that. But what I did was I went back into survival mode, and I knew how to get money. I've always worked. I've always done all the things, you know. But ultimately, it landed me in jail. I started blurring the lines, committing crimes. I ended up doing, I was what do you call it? Not a co-defendant, joint venture on a home invasion. And it was not good. Ultimately, I ended up with a state prison sentence over it. And that was really the first time that I had to grow up. You know, I didn't know what I was doing or where I was, but you're in a situation where like you have to grow up. And even at that, there's no real resources in there. You know, there was no therapy. There's sure they have like AA and NA that comes up, and there's a church on Sunday, but people just go to get out of their cells. You know what I mean? There's no like real context to any of it. And even that compounded my survival instinct, but even more my trauma. It's like I kind of used a reference of like when you go on a long vacation, and when you go, you got it all neat and packed, but on the way home, it's just like you're kicking it in there. You know what I mean? And then just like come home and like throw that under your bed. And like eventually, like you got to unpack the dirty laundry. But I just kept buying a bigger suitcase and putting one in the other. Ultimately, when I was in state prison, I lost my mother. Didn't get to attend her funeral. I got to go to her wake for a minute before anybody else was there. So I lost my mom, who was over 30 years sober when she passed away, but I never knew enough about it to really like talk to her much about it. Was in a serious physical altercation that landed me in ICU for 2 weeks. I have a rod and 4 screws in my leg because of it. That was rough. Ended up doing almost 2 months in solitary confinement while I was in. In all of this stuff, I just like took as part of the course. Just like the first time I went up to Rodney Street, and everybody was like, "Oh, little John," you know what I mean? It's like my baseline was so skewed that then when I came home, finally, and I met my wife and got into peer support, I realized like how skewed that baseline was. You know what I mean? And that's not where the suffering stopped, for sure. But I definitely had a lot to unpack, and I'm still doing it now. And that's why I think that stuff like this and talking about it is so important, because it wasn't very acceptable to be like, you know what, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
I need to talk about this. I need to figure it out. What's a healthy baseline? You know, what is, you know? So it's been a long journey, and my substance use was really just a coping mechanism for all of that. It made me numb. It made me be able to work longer. Whether it was substances, I did have a few stints of like longer recovery, year or two. I think I had up to 4 once. But like my addiction just manifested itself in other ways. I wasn't living a healthy lifestyle. I was working too much. I was, you know what I mean? I was definitely not, I didn't even know what wellness meant back then.
Yeah.
You know?
So you talked about like this Pandora box and meeting the substance for the first time and opening this Pandora. I think for me, maybe I think I had a lot of that with my substance use. Like, I mean, I started at like, I don't know. I think the very first time that I ever used something, that just flashed me back, was like, was my asthma pump when I was like in first grade and my asthma medication. I remember like taking that and then like the feeling of that and wanting more. And it would just take me out of whatever I was, because I experienced like, the house was chaotic all the time. I'm just thinking when you're saying Pandora box and like the substance, I think some people might feel a confidence out of that and be like, oh yeah, it just gave me confidence to walk around and da-da-da. But it sounds like when you say I took that substance and it opened up this Pandora box,
Yeah.
it seems like and, you know, maybe you can speak a little bit more, you opened up maybe past years of memory that you had shoved down.
Mm-hmm.
So then what was that experience of like, holy shit, this is here? And what can you maybe describe now of the feeling then, as you opened that up?
I mean, I wish that I had somebody in my life that peer support.
Yeah.
I wish, um, because that's it. Is like I didn't know how to deal with it, but that's what had happened. Like a lot of the drugs that are out there, whether it be cocaine, MDMA, all of these, you know, there's a lot of talk about like ibogaine and psilocybin and all of this like revolutionary stuff that's going on right now. Like a lot of these drugs were produced for like their clinical value. You know what I mean? So a lot of things like MDMA, it was originally produced to help break down the barrier between like patient and psychiatrist. So ultimately, that's what I did I was self-medicating. That's what I was doing. There's not a doubt and I understand that now.
Yeah.
But like it's like hindsight's 2020, right? Like looking back at that, I realized how good I was at being okay on the outside. You know, I realize now that like it never had to get that bad. You know, I pride myself in knowing, especially the last time that I finally was done using, is like I realized that like I didn't have to let the wheels fall off. You know what I mean? Like when you don't let your tire fall off of your car, when your brakes start to squeal, you bring it to the shop and have your brakes done. You know, you have to do routine maintenance on things, including myself. But looking back at it, I unlocked all of these memories that I didn't know what to do with. And it took me a long time to come to terms with a lot of things. And it, you know, I still think today I process things. Things will like drum up situations. And I'll like come to this realization about something that happened to me when I was so much younger. And it's like that's the biggest push for what I do now is like knowledge is power. I love to when I was asked to go speak at Harvard, I got to hear like the leading researchers, and I got to take my 22-year-old son with me, which was absolutely amazing. When they invited me, I said, "Can I bring my son?" You know, so that he can see the other side of this, because he only saw it from like a removed perspective. But we got to read about, he got to hear firsthand, not out of my mouth, which is the most important thing. That all of this is a dopamine problem, and that we're supposed to pick up dopamine throughout the day in little doses. But when you abuse substances at such a young age and you deal with these traumatic coping mechanisms, you're used to getting all of your dopamine from one source at one time. And then you completely hijack your body's natural system that is supposed to be, we need to eat and we need to drink and we need to work out and we need to do all of this other stuff. All of that gets put on the sidelines. And now your body's like, oh, why would I do all these little things when I get all my dopamine from this thing? It's a very simple factor of it. And to hear about that, and I was learning, my jaw was on the floor and looked over, and my son was too. It's so simple now, you know. It's like it seems so simple now. If I could have just gotten out of my own way and asked for help back then, I'm grateful because I'm where I'm at now. But like, didn't have to take the hard road, man. I really didn't. And that's it. Is like that Pandora's box. I now know that I have to unpack my suitcase on the regular. You know, I have to do that. It's the biggest lesson that I've learned throughout all of this is I can't act like it's okay. I can't bury my head in the sand. Like you got to face the music, good, bad, or indifferent. But there's peers out there. I learned that every crazy story that I have, Somebody else has one to match. Somebody else has had a different journey, not better or worse, but like the struggle is real. And ultimately that's it, is there just wasn't the baseline of help that back then that there was now, and I love that about the culture of wellness and recovery today. But that I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it, where I was when I um spoke the words about what happened to me for the first time, and it where it all started and all that. But ultimately I realize now that a lot of that wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
so
And I think it's so important when you're thinking about, what little control as a child,
yes,
right? We have, like, we're really dependent on our keepers, right? The adults to protect us. So,
yes,
what does that look like when that is violated? And we have to then, then eventually, right? You're like in your 20s and you get kind of smacked with this information. And I think that that illusion of like, was I protected, or who was protecting me, or what does that look like, and how do you navigate
makes
that
you question
space? It
everything.
makes you question everything. And I
Yes,
think especially, obviously I can't speak from a man's perspective, but I think that there's obviously like probably another level of shame um that is attached to it, just because, right? Like, for a woman, you're like, it, not that it's right, but like we've been sexualized in a way that
yes,
it's you know then it leads for us to maybe even talk about it more, or it's just so normalized that it's opened. And so I think when you're coming from being able to actually speak the words, and even to me right now, being able to say that, I can imagine this hopefully will give someone the room to say, that is part of my story, and how do I get help?
yeah.
Um, so what does it look like? You get out, you mentioned a little bit, and we'll go back and forth. You mentioned a little bit about coming out of state prison.
hmm
You went back to your old stomping grounds, or like, what did that look like? Did you?
I did. I went back. I was supposed to get a room at the Dismas house, but there was a communication breakdown, we'll
Mhm.
call it. And I had already gotten back to my father's house and like settled in that that's where I was going to be. And then I got the phone call that there would be a bed at Dismas house. And like at that point, I'm like, I'm in this house now.
Mhm.
Like I'm not, you know what I mean? So it's like in hindsight, should have gone to Dismas house.
Mhm.
But hindsight's 2020. Definitely should have gone to Dismas house. Um, but yeah, I still didn't have the confidence to stand up. I had now Pandora's box was not my problem at the moment,
Mm.
and that was one of the significant things in my life, is like I've gone from like one traumatic event to the next.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, we don't have time for that no more. It's like on to the next one. You know what I mean? Um, and I didn't know what that was like. And from the biggest thing that's changed for me is like my perspective on what being a man or a father is. My father was a provider. It's ironic that we're actually sitting here right now because that storage building that's
Mm.
right there.
Yeah.
We ran my father owned that building. I was the office manager there. I think he bought it in 1985, the year that I was born. Sold it shortly before 2000. So like this was my stomping ground. So it's like to come back is crazy. Um, but he worked his ass off
Yeah.
and he provided for us. Like I said, we went to the best schools. We didn't have the nicest house. We lived in a 3-decker that we owned.
Mm.
My brother lived upstairs, my sister's downstairs. But like I still didn't have the confidence, you know what I mean? And especially in the carceratory setting, all that can become weakness real quick. You know what I mean? And growing up in the neighborhood that I grew up in, ultimately, the reason that I traveled down to Rodney Street in the first place is because my basketball and my bikes kept getting stolen. And like, I was tired of it. So I went down and I was like, I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I'm just not going to be a victim anymore. I learned how to fight. And then once you realize that, like, you know, bullies pick on the weak, it's just a willingness to stand up for yourself. All of a sudden, it's like now I had some type of credit because they were like, little John will fight. And then my basketball stopped going missing and all of that. So like, I learned to put this like hard exterior on, and then going into state prison and all that, like that didn't help. You know what I mean? Like you had to. I ended up getting into that fight because somebody called me a snitch, and it's a word that you don't throw around when you're in jail. And a lot of people were like, bro, we know that that's not the case. You know what I mean? He's an idiot. Like somebody got caught with something in their cell. And his rationale was like, oh, John must have said something. But like, I'm not going to walk around like that on a state prison grounds. Absolutely not. So I went out to fight him and ended up getting jumped by his friends because I was going to get the W on him. So like, again, I learned to have this like tough, hard shell. So even when I came home, like I still wanted to be like the tough guy for my wife back then, or she was just my roommate back then. But I never could be, I was never confident enough to be vulnerable, to really take a good look in the mirror. You know what I mean? I wasn't. But having said that, my my image of what a man was or a father was a provider. You know what I mean? Like my father wasn't emotionally connected to us at all. That was my mom's duty. It was a very stereotypical household. You know what I mean? My mom did all the homework and the cooks and all that stuff, and my father worked. Yeah. He busted his ass. He provided. Still like brought me to hockey games and all that good stuff. I'm not saying that like that's the only thing that he did. But that was my perspective of what a man was. You know what I mean? And then growing up, and going through all these series of events that like I had to have this hard exterior. You know what I mean? Until I met Kirsten, like I realized that I could be vulnerable. I've had my past thrown in my face a lot. I've had it weaponized so much by other significant others in my life. So that also closed me off. You know, I'm not going to tell nobody nothing, you know, and because it was used against me. And I was running from my past. Now I love stuff like this because it allows me to own my past so it doesn't own me. And that's it. As I finally got to a point that I started to become the person that I was, and I had good people, good peers around me that wouldn't use the information that I gave against them. If anything, they sat with me, and I realized that I wasn't the only one because I started talking about it a little bit. You know what I mean? And ultimately, after that, it was not a clean journey for me. I returned back to the Worcester House of Correction no less than 9 separate times after I came home from state prison because I could not stop getting high. Yeah. I would pick up little like petty cases, but ultimately it was because I played Catch Me If I Can, and Catch Me If You Can. I had every single probation officer down at Worcester Superior Court. I hope some of them see it and laugh. I stop down there all the time and talk to them. But it's great. I turned 3 years of probation into 11 because I just couldn't stop, you know? And ultimately, I didn't realize that it's because I was self-medicating. Like, if I would have just done some work and asked for some help, granted, the culture was different back then. Yeah. Now, if you go into probation and you're like, I'm struggling, they're like, well, let's get a coach on the phone. Let me see if I can get you into a detox or a program or something like that. Before, they were just like, no, lock them up. And I didn't do myself any favors because I was never honest. But I was kept running from stuff. And then ultimately I finally got myself in like a good relationship. My wife also in recovery. So like us trying to navigate this together was like this whirlwind. We've been together 12 years now and it's been a wild ride. Now we have her and I have 2 beautiful girls. I have 4 children. I have a 22-year-old son, an 18-year-old. Actually, she's 19 today. Happy birthday, Rissa. Yeah. So I have a 19-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old daughter, and a 1.5-year-old daughter. But I didn't realize like what I was running from, because I was the provider. I had to like have this hard exterior. And then once I realized that like I could ask for help, that it's okay to not be okay sometimes, and did a little bit of work for that. I'm not going to say it was easy, but that's why I tell my story so freely now, is because it just wasn't acceptable. I was speaking to somebody yesterday. I always like talk to him about like whenever I'm going to do something. He does a bunch of recovery messaging, stuff like that. And we were talking about that. It's like it's acceptable if a female is upset and they show emotion, like it's acceptable. You know what I mean? However, if a man does that, they're not considered strong. They're not considered a man. We're shifting culture now more. Thank God. But it's a more stereotypical reaction to rage out and break something and get angry, and like that's what society's normal of a man showing emotion is. Like we're not supposed to be vulnerable. We're not supposed to cry. We're not supposed to do any of that stuff. But ultimately, like that's what I realized is like I need to be authentic in order to be okay. I need to. There are. And that's why I've dedicated my life to peer support at this point, whether it be for organizations that I work for or that I've founded or any of that stuff. It's that it's okay to not be okay. It's all right. And hopefully I know that I've seen people like my good friend, business partner Matt, that was going to be here today. I see like the stuff that he's gotten over, and like that, like it's possible to be authentic and to be a good parent and to be an emotionally available parent, and not just, the disciplinary or the provider. You know what I mean? But I definitely think that from a male's perspective, I think that there's so much pressure on us to perform, to provide, to do all the things. And as having 3 sisters and three daughters, I give women all the credit in the world for the emotional burden that the male significant other in their life has, because we're a lot to deal with, because a lot of times we can't show that side of us in society, so our significant other gets the brunt of it, which is in a lot of people aren't lucky enough to have somebody that will stand by them. But also we don't have the tools, because we don't talk about it, on how to express it in a way that doesn't come off as abusive or any of that. You know what I mean? A healthy way to like talk about what's inside, like that's unheard of, And I just feel like there's this like huge pressure that a lot of fathers and men don't talk about, to perform, and like we're supposed to be okay all the time, and that's just not the case. It's just not the case.
I relate to that, and with my own personal relationships. And I think when you're talking about men and their experience and like the vulnerability, I like it can be uncomfortable, right? I think for me as a woman, like you're like, oh God, is he gonna cry? Like, is he gonna, like, what's happening? And you don't know how to process it, because it's like we haven't had a chance, I think, as a community, and partnerships and relationships, to build that, other narrative of like, what would it look like to allow someone to be vulnerable, to allow the male to be vulnerable in a way that you could reciprocally carry the weight of each other's emotional, experience, that it doesn't feel like you would be shamed for,
Right.
or you wouldn't be, looked as lesser, right? Or,
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't actually still provide, which seems crazy to think
It
that
does.
because you would be vulnerable, or because you would show more emotion, that also means that you wouldn't provide, because it's like that would probably make you a better provider, right?
I love that about me today,
Yeah.
in that I don't think that that is like the fundamental principle of being a father anymore.
Mm.
Like, I love putting my girls to bed and getting them up. All of it. I love
Yeah.
every minute of it. But also I think that people, or my, I'm keeping on myself. That as a person with substance use disorder, as a person that has a felony record, all of that, I um I felt like I always had to like make up for lost time. You know what I mean? And this is something that one of the most recent lessons I've learned is just like, forget all that. You know what I mean? But I I thought that I needed to make up for lost time, even with my adult kids. I have a great relationship with them now, and that's because I stopped making up for all the BS that I had. You know what I mean? I stopped that, and like every now and then I get on my soapbox and I like, well, I'll mess with my son and be like, I'm sorry, whatever. And he's like, why do you keep doing this?
Yeah.
Like, he's like, I'm over it. He's like, how it makes no difference to me. Like, where you were or who you were, all that matters is that you're here now. You're not going back. And once I realized I didn't have to keep making up for lost time, I realized that I could slow down a little bit. But I definitely always felt like I should have been further along than where I was. And like, I wasted so many years of my life working way too hard and missing the joy of what was right in front of me. You know what I mean? And that was huge to me, that I could take a step back and realize that like I didn't have to make up for all that. And I think that I definitely wanted to touch on this, that I think that that is part of the problem with, or part of the issue with people with lived experience in the workforce, right? Is the stigma of all that. It's not, we can't just say it's okay to not be okay, right? Because we feel like we got something to prove. You know what I mean? We spoke a little bit before this about like the clinical world not necessarily taking the lived experience world all that serious. Um, and still looking at us like we're a liability. You know what I mean? Um, but that's because like we get a little bit of confidence back. We put the substance down, and then we focus on, now I've got to make everybody happy. I got to live up to this. I can't let anybody think that anything's wrong. You know what I mean? And then ultimately we start filling up that suitcase again, and we start not processing stuff the way we should. We're not dealing with stuff. We're throwing it in that suitcase under the bed, packing Pandora's box back up again. And then eventually we get to the point that history repeats itself. And then it's like, oh, stigma's right.
It implodes.
You know what I mean? Oh, you got high again. Or God forbid somebody takes a beat and they're like, no, I do need a minute. I need to go on vacation, or I need to, every week at noontime, I'm going to take an hour lunch because I have to go see my therapist, or whatever it is. Practice good self-care, whatever that means for whomever it is. The first thing people say is, oh, did you hear about this person? Oh, you think this person's getting high. This one, everybody loves to stand there with a handful of rocks. You know what I mean? And like, that's not peer support. That's not helping people that are in recovery trying to give back. Cause like, that's why I have the passion I have today for what I do, is I see the need for it. I was saved by it. I firsthand experienced the power that it's going to finally, like, I learned to own my past so my past wouldn't own me. And we're getting there. But I feel like that's part of the problem with the stereotype of people burning out in the lived experience workforce, is because we're just, we're afraid to say, I'm not okay. When I was, being certified as a recovery coach supervisor, this will always stick with me. It said that a normal supervisor is supposed to make sure that somebody does their job well. A recovery coach supervisor is supposed to make sure that you're well while you're doing your job. And granted, a lot of people just say words, and everybody can talk a good game. But ultimately, if somebody needs a beat to go off, like it's not, as a supervisor, it's not my job to be like, are you okay? Are you okay? No. My job is to be approachable so that you can say, hey, I'm going through this. This just happened, and it kind of hit me a little different. I didn't expect that. Work we do is heavy. It's heavy, and as far as that, the clinical world can just not take it home.
Yeah.
Not all of them, not to stereotype by any means, but it's harder for us because, like, we feel it. It resonates. Yeah. It hits different. It might drum up a memory, And one of the coaches, one of the legs of the stool for recovery coaching is like manage your own stuff. You know what I mean? So it's a lot harder to navigate that, being a parent, being a father, being somebody with lived experience and in the workforce. It's like you've got all this stuff that goes back to the stigma. Is I got to keep this hard shell. Everything's always got to be okay. I got to look neat and clean and all of it. There was a point in time that like I cared so much about how I looked, and like it wasn't about like the message or how I was feeling. It's how I wanted everybody else to think I was feeling, and that's not healthy either, for me to walk around and being a survivor of all this and being in survival mode for so long. Like I know how, like, you could drop me anywhere and I'll be all right, so like it's a curse and a blessing at the same time. But being able to like drop that shield a little bit and talk about the fact that, like, bad shit happens. Yeah. And it's just like, you just can't not deal with it. It's not an option anymore.
What did it look like, maybe your last time using and you starting to realize you needed to do something different because of the back and forth to county and all of that wasn't working? You realize, like, okay, I need to get serious and start to do something different.
I know I've spent so much time thinking about this stuff. So back when I was, first coming around, there was only 2 fellowships that were out there, AA and NA. And I'll never forget it. Everybody was like, sit down, shut up, cotton out of your ears and into your mouth, and like didn't want you to hear anything, none of it, you know what I mean? And like I do agree that like rigidity in the beginning it can be very useful, having steps laid out for you, do this and then do this, right, when you don't know what to do next. Absolutely. And if that works for you, I love it, love that for you. But I realized that like something was missing. And I remember that when the last time I used was New Year's Eve, 2 New Year's Eves ago. I don't count time either. So a little over 2 years ago. I started hanging out with the circle of people that now clearly my wife, but she was a recovery coach before I even knew what that was. So Kerry, Matt, Dawn, Mike, like my whole circle. You ever see us in pictures? Like that's it. That's my recovery tribe all day. But I saw this like camaraderie. I saw this like different support, right? And because I had good support, Kirsten asked me one day, like, you got a problem, don't you? And I'm like, I do. And she was like, you need to go to detox. I was like, I do. And that was it. She didn't like press me on it. You know what I mean? She just like didn't make a big deal about it. Like, it was wild to me. That's just like, it was 2 questions that I could answer, and it was so relieving to me because like in my mind, I'm like, how am I going to tell her this? Like I'm at the end of my rope. Like I was literally using for the period of time that I was using because I was so petrified of being sick, so petrified of going into withdrawal. that like, I'm like, how do I say this, you know? And like, she saw the signs, but, you know, admittedly, she like would look the other way, or like listen to my BS about it, because like that was easier than, you know what I mean? Like, the father of my kid, yeah, is this is pre my daughter, our youngest daughter, Lucy. And so like with those two questions, it was like, what? Like the air is clear. And and then she's like, you working on it? I was like, yeah. And then I did, and eventually I went to her and was just like, yeah, I gotta go to detox. I didn't end up going to detox because I realized that I for whatever reason, I kicked it home on my couch, and she let me do that. It was miserable. I would have sworn to you up and down that it was 3 months that I died on that couch. I went back and did the math. It was like 28 days. But I would have sold the farm on it that it was 3 months. It was the most miserable time of my life. But the whole time that I was a lump on the couch, my wife was working remote as a recovery coach. So like, I could hear the conversations that she was having, and I saw like the the impact that she was having on people, and the response that she was getting from other people, and how like fulfilling it was. And then she kept telling me to call Matt. She kept telling me, you got to call Matt. You got to call Matt. And then eventually I did. And then I got like drawn into this like recovery circle. And I was like, you know what? I was like, I've done construction my whole life because I've had a quarry and all that. Like, it was the easiest thing that I could do. And I broke my hand bad, lost that job. I was a mess in hindsight. But I was great at my job. You know, I'm master at that craft. But I knew that wasn't it, because it beat my body up. I got all the injuries, all the things. And then I'm like, I want to like see what this recovery coach thing is about. So Carson was like, hey, they're doing, the REC is doing a recovery coach academy. And I think I can get you in for free. It was like, sick, sign me up.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And then I went and did it. And I forget what day it was, but Michelle Simmons did it. She's a beast. And she called on me, and she said something to me. Well, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, well, you're the expert. And I was like, who's the expert? And she was like, you're the expert. I was like, on what? And she was like, you.
I love that.
And I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. And it was like, I'll again never forget where I was at that moment, that I realized that I didn't have to like ask anybody else, what should I do? How did you do it? They say in the fellowships, go find somebody that has what you have and ask them how they got it. I did that. And you know what that got me? My MSA number, you know? So when she hit me with that, I was like, man, I'm like, you're right. I am the expert on myself. And then by asking good questions and the fundamental principles of recovery coaching, like, I realized that like, I don't have to have all the answers. I just have to know how to ask the right question to help somebody else through their process. I don't need all these acronyms at the end of my name. I just need to be able to ask good questions. And like, that was like the biggest pivotal moment for me, was that I realized that like, I could have some confidence in knowing what I needed. You know what I mean? In doing that, I now realize that I need to not throw it in the suitcase and do my laundry regularly, and, you know, clean it in the bed. And for everybody that's been in a sober house before, GI at the end of the week, you know what I'm saying? Clean out that drawer, and, you know what I mean? All that stuff.
Get behind the refrigerator.
All that stuff, you know what I mean? But that was like the biggest pivotal moment for me, is that somebody else called me an expert on me, you know? And I realized that doing that, and then we go on like these yearly vacations together, like the whole squad of us, and just go and like get away for a bit and not answer our cell phones, and we've all got kids and families we've got all the kids. I think there's like 20 of us if we all go together. People are like, what kind of party are you having? We're like, it's just a cookout. It's just a fire on a Friday. But that was the big thing, is like, I was an expert on me, and we're all just trying to figure it out. Like, nobody's got all the answers, but we can sure come back to the table and talk about it and figure it out. But it was a huge moment for me when somebody put the power back in my hands, and didn't try to, there was no transfer of information for somebody to weaponize. There was none of it. It was just me trying to be a little bit better and realize that this isn't a substance problem. It's not. The drugs and alcohol are not the problem. That's just a consequence of all the underlying trauma and behaviors and responses and all that stuff. That's what it is. You take away that, you still got all the problems. I wondered why I kept going back to getting high again. It's because I would take away that layer of coping, the self-medication, and I was still left with me. I'm the common denominator in all my problems today, and I would just not seek professional help for them. I'm like, no, I got it, and wonder why I self-medicated or kept myself so busy that I didn't have to worry about what was underneath that layer, and now that I realized that drugs and alcohol weren't the problem, it's like I was the problem. And it led back to before I was 10, before I had a decision to be made in it. I wasn't a willing participant then. I was for a lot of it, but back then I was not.
I just was thinking, because I just did like a video the other day. I was like driving to my aunt's house, and I was listening to like my praise music in the car, and I was just like, I had just worked a double at the hospital, and I really like had this moment, like it was just like what you said, that power, right? Like when you understand you have the power to create your own narrative, when you understand that you are your own healer, you can be like, are there people that can help you along the journey? Absolutely, right? But who makes that choice? Who makes that decision if they want to take that journey? It's you. And so it's just, I feel like, I think more people need to understand that you are the power. You are the, person that can make that choice.
I am responsible for me.
And if this is part of that, like giving you that permission to give yourself permission, like I think that that's just such a powerful thing to be like, you are the expert of your own life. You are the person that can take control and create a new narrative for yourself, right? And I think that that's so powerful, to use your own experience to then gift that back, right? And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what are exactly the things that you're doing now for John that allows you to have better mental health, better boundary clarity, and allows you to work in a way that is personal to you?
So I've realized, thanks to one of the things that I do, is me and my wife go to couples therapy. It's great. I feel like I thought, and a lot of people think, that like your relationship's got to be in turmoil for it to happen. You know what I mean? But that's just simply not the case. But I've realized that I've got to fill each bucket separately. And it seems like a very simple concept, but until somebody points that out to you, because I'm the type of person that I've developed all these things. I've got undiagnosed adult ADHD for sure. So I can multitask. I like, you call me the comeback kid. Like, I've burnt it down and built it back up more times than people can even fathom. You know, all the businesses, all the things, and ultimately that's what I said to my partners today is like, listen, tell me what you want and I'll get it. You help me keep it, I'll get it for us. You know what I mean? So I want to do everything all at once. You know what I mean? I want to fill all my buckets with each one of my children and my wife and do all this all at once. And it's taxing. It's too much, you know? And we live in a perfect world. I mean, we don't live in a perfect world. So the idea is that Kirsten and I should, you know, have a date night once a week. Does that happen once a week? No, but like we know and we try for it, but life be life.
You know what I mean? Intentions are there.
That's it.
Life is happening.
It definitely is. But even spending time with each one of my children individually. My older two children are on their own, killing it, by the way. I'm so proud of my son. He's so responsible. But my 5-year-old, she got kind of lost in the shuffle, kind of like I did, you know, because when you have an infant, like they demand attention. They can't wait. You know what I mean? But now, like, even if it's just running errands with Olivia, you know, like she loves to like come out and we'll go do all the things. She'll come to the office with me and paint and all the stuff, you know what I mean? Like filling each bucket individually. But also I didn't realize, going back to my baseline, I suffer from chronic pain. I've got so many injuries going all the way back to being hit in the back with a baseball bat when I was young. But the rod and 4 screws in my leg, I healed while I was in solitary confinement with no PT, no follow-up visit, nothing. So I have no mobility in my ankle. I've got rods and 4 screws in my leg, and it's just transferred right up my body. And I didn't realize the toll that was taking on me. Because again, my baseline, you know, I was just talking to somebody that I support the other day, and she was keeping track of her pain score. And I was like, yeah, but my 2 could be somebody else's 10. And she was like, thank you. I am so glad that somebody else understands that. But that's a big piece of like my wellness is going back to our recovery tribe. 2 of them. Shout out to Authentic Ambiance on they're right on Grafton Street in Grafton, right over the line, right near kind of like Bread Guy Bread's over there. But they do like all different kinds of massages, but they do like sound healing and Reiki and all this stuff. And the first time that Amy, we were on one of our retreats, and like she has this ball that's like stuck to the wall. And you can like rub a knot out with it. And she saw me like doing my hip, and she's like, what are you doing? And I told her, it was the first time I like told her, and she was the first person ever like listened to me. She was like, come over here, lay down on the ground. I literally sobbed. Like the second she did whatever she did to me, like the relief, it wasn't even like, it was just the lack of pain. It was nuts that it took it away from me. So now I go to see them regularly, go to the chiropractor, all of the stuff. For me, that's what it means, is like I have to take care of myself, because I put myself last forever, because I felt like I had to make up for it. I had a kid now. I had another kid. I had another kid. Now I've been to jail, and I left Kirsten the whole time. From the day I got home, I literally hit her up. Like that night, I made a Facebook. She popped up as people you may know. I said, you still doing the clean and sober thing? And she was just like, yeah, let's set a meeting. That's literally how our relationship started. I knew her from high school, but we never really talked. You know what I mean? We were different friend circles. But from that point on, it could be we were at my house, and I'm like, I'm going to go check into probation, and then call her from intake and be like, she's like, what just happened? And then I wouldn't come home for 9 months. So I'd be up at the Channing house and, you know, somewhere. And I always felt like I had to make up for it. As soon as I got home, my case manager or whatever would be like, so what are you going to do? And I'm like, I got to go to work. I have to work. I have to work. And how many times you hear that when you support somebody? I got to work. Got my kids, my work. It's like, dude, you know how many times I disappointed my family, my kids, my significant other, and myself because I said my kids and my work? It's like if I would have just sat down for a second and gotten out of my own way and did a little bit of work and learned what self-care was, like I hopefully would be where I'm at 30 and not 40, you know? But that's it, is like putting me first, and it's not easy, you know? Kirsten doesn't love it when I have to make it about me, but she understands. You know what I mean? Just like when she's got to do stuff for her. And like that's the part of being in an interdependent relationship and not a codependent relationship. Is like we had to learn that like we can do stuff together. But again, we have to fill our own buckets separate. That's the biggest thing, is like filling each bucket separately. Sometimes one has to wait. But that's just life. But like that's it. I gotta stop putting me last, you know? It's never ended me. It's gotten me places, but nowhere for long. You know?
And I think that the important thing here for me hearing is using, right, the different modalities, using therapy, using these things and saying it's okay to try things that we may not have heard of or that may seem like woo woo, or you're like, what do you mean sound healing? What do you mean Reiki?
I was the same way.
And I think
Guilty.
it's that carries its own stigma, right? And I use it like, and I think you mentioned first, like, you talking about, your son and you going to Harvard and listening, like a lot of these things are scientific, right? So even if you take away like what we may think, because I think sometimes religion may get into play with it, or if you take away that and you just get down to the science of a lot of these things, the work that you can do and the pain you can save yourself, right? And the curiosity, and just coming in with curiosity and a little bit of like, well, this hasn't worked, so let me try this. What that can do to shape the way you approach
it's amazing.
your wellness.
And I mean, even like religion and all that, like whatever does it for you, the mind is a powerful place. You know, and ultimately, like, what is reality? If you believe full-heartedly what is happening, if you've, going back to mental health, like if you've ever worked with somebody in the midst of a mental health lapse, you are not going to convince them that what they're experiencing isn't 100% facts, and that's the case. So if you get yourself all wound up in the ick, like you're going to be stuck there. And that's why I think that I'm also happy that now we're treating all of this as like underlying wellness. Before it was like mental health, substance use disorder, then there was co-occurring. Now we're moving towards like overall wellness, because like when I always say, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, when it's substance use and mental health, because one compounds the other. And you don't realize what you're doing when you're in the midst of all of it, self-medicating or whatever, numbing the pain. But yeah, you have to try new things. And like, for me, that was a huge moment, is the first time we all went to our first like tribe, like gathering, right? I didn't really know any of the other people. I knew of them, didn't even really know Matt that well, which is nuts to think, because of how close we are now. But I was like hesitant, because I'm like, new people, I'm supposed to like, and Kirsten's just like, no, like you're coming, like you've got to meet these people, like I'm telling you. And like it was almost immediate when I like stepped over the threshold of that house. The feeling that I got was just so like it's gonna be okay, and it's like wild to think back on it, but it was like I was sitting amongst people that I had known forever, but I didn't, because it wasn't it wasn't the surface value stuff that connected us. It was our trauma bonds. It was like my son said, it didn't matter how you got here.
Yeah.
As long as we're here, we're not going to go back there.
Yeah.
Like that's all that really matters. And then I was introduced to sound healing and all that. And like, if you haven't tried it, try it for sure. It is hard to explain, but easy to understand. You know, I always feel like $1,000,000 whenever I experience it or go to one. And it's nice. The first time, as a matter of fact, like all of it. And even, I think what it comes down to too is just taking a minute for you, right? And that's what I get the most out of like sound healing or even massages or all that. Some type of massages. Is that it's a beat for me. Kirsten and I were looking for something to do, and we couldn't figure it out. We go out to eat, like, like whatever. And she's like, "You want to go get a massage?" And like, I wasn't a fan of like the regular massages. They hurt me because of my trauma, right? And I'm like, you know what? Whatever. Like, let's do it. And I realized that sitting in that room with Kirsten just for an hour of silence, I knew where she was. I knew my kids were happy. I knew they were safe. Just that hour, like, I couldn't even tell you what the massage was like because I was just, I could turn it off. And it's almost like the touching gave me something to focus on, like a fidget spinner. You know what I mean? And like, when I left there, I was like, that was great. I didn't realize how much I needed that until it was over. And that's what happened the first time I went to a sound bath. Is Matt did one once for a group of us, and like there was like 30 people in the room. Every one of us was crying by the end of it. And it's like nobody said anything. You know what I mean? And it's just, they're so authentic, and it's just a way to connect with people without having to worry about how I'm going to explain stuff. Yeah. You know what I mean? But yeah, I was definitely a skeptic with all of that. And until I experienced it and learned to get out of my comfort zone, it was life-changing for me. You know, I feel better than I have. I'm not without pain, but I didn't realize like how much of my tolerance was being taken up by that. And then talk about mental health, like, you know, if you're wound so tight, you know, how else are you going to react? Yeah. You know what I mean? And it got to a point that enough was enough with it. And I needed to learn to like put my bucket first, you know?
I love that. So as we close up, what is the one thing I think you can leave to another man in this space that they may be able to take with them and carry?
I always go back to, it's okay to not be okay. But I want to give a shout out to my mother-in-law, because she gave me this. It's mental health awareness hoodie that says "You are enough." Yeah. And it was such like an off the cuff gift, for one, because we don't have that kind of relationship. She's super supportive and all that stuff. Like, it is what it is. And I always say this, like, if my daughter brought home me, I wouldn't like me either. You know what I mean? I'm a realist here. Today, sure. Yeah. But if you read on a piece of paper who I was and what I was about, absolutely not. I would have met him at the door and been like, you can turn right back around, bro. But getting this, "You are enough," it's simple, but it meant so much. Yeah. Because I think she realized before I did, that's what I was trying to do, is make up for lost time and prove that, like, I'm not a screw up. But that's it. It's like, you're enough. Just the way you are. That's it. Show up. It's half the battle. Appreciate you.
That's good.
Thank you.
So you heard it here. You are enough. And I hope as we present these episodes and highlight men's mental health and awareness, that you can, understand that you are enough, and there are supports, there are tribes out there waiting for you. So thank you so much, John, again for this episode of Crossroad Conversations. You can follow us on all our platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all of the things. We are a nonprofit, so any supports is really welcomed. And John, would you like to can we find you somewhere where someone could reach out to you?
Yeah. So one of the things that Matt and I founded was, we looked back and we said, where are the gaps that would have helped us? And we started an organization called GAAP Recovery, GAAP Recovery.org, where we do recovery coaching, free. You don't need insurance or anything like that, but really just like a friend on the phone. It's not like your stereotypical like recovery coach. Like, we can hook you up with that, but like, we've been around long enough where, like, if you got a random question and you don't know who to ask about it, like, hit it up. Like, Matt's changed more people's lives than anybody I know. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, you heard it here. We will attach that along with this episode. So thank you. Bye, Worcester.
Bye.
Welcome to the place where paths collide. Crossroad conversations, let's take the ride. From shadows deep to the light we seek. Stories of strength, the voices speak.